In the climate-controlled vault of the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, there sits a fragment of baked earth, no larger than your hand. Catalogue number CBS 1673, 17 by 9 centimetres, reddish brown, the colour of dried blood or ancient soil. The surface is covered in tiny wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform script pressed into soft clay 6 centuries ago, before the tablet was fired hard in a kiln somewhere in southern Iraq. The weight of it, when the curator lifts it from its archival housing, is surprising, denser than you'd expect, cool to the touch despite the room's temperature, and across its face, in lines of Sumerian text that took scholars decades to decipher, is an account of the world before a great flood, cities that existed, kings who ruled, and then divine intervention, a deliberate destruction, not because humanity had sinned, but because humanity had become something the gods could no longer tolerate. The tablet was discovered during the University of Pennsylvania's excavations at Nippur between 1889 and 1900. Nippur, ancient religious centre, city of Enlil, the supreme deity of the Sumerian pantheon. The archaeologists found it in the temple complex, buried under metres of accumulated debris from civilizations that had risen and fallen over 3,000 years. When they shipped it back to Philadelphia, along with tens of thousands of other tablets, no one yet understood what it said. The script was still being decoded. The language was dead. The civilization that created it had been forgotten for 2 millennia. But CBS 10673 would eventually reveal something that appears again and again across the Sumerian textual record, inscribed on tablets found at different sites, from different periods, by different scribes, the suggestion that human intelligence was not celebrated by those who created humanity. That knowledge was not freely given, but jealously guarded. That when humans acquired too much understanding, or grew too numerous, or unified their purpose, the response from the divine realm was not pride, but alarm. And then action. This is not a fringe theory. This is not ancient astronaut speculation. This is what the texts themselves say when you read them carefully, when you look at what they actually describe, rather than filtering them through later religious frameworks. The Sumerians left us a library written in clay, the most durable medium in the ancient world, more lasting than papyrus or parchment or paper, and that library preserves a perspective that makes many modern scholars uncomfortable. The possibility that humanity's creators, call them gods, call them Anunnaki, call them whatever framework you prefer, implemented controls, restrictions, interventions to prevent humans from achieving equality. You're watching this at a specific moment, perhaps late at night, perhaps as the day winds down. Wherever you are in the world right now, I'd love to know. Drop a comment with your location and the time. The evidence is scattered across dozens of tablets, but it tells a coherent story. And the story begins not with punishment for sin, but with a problem the gods faced from the very start. They had created servants who were becoming something more than servants. Workers who were learning, developing, growing noisy with activity and ambition. This is the investigation we're beginning tonight. Not an argument for conclusions, but an examination of what the oldest written records in human history actually preserve. We'll look at the creation accounts, the flood narratives, the stories of forbidden wisdom and denied immortality, the kings who lived impossibly long before the flood, but became mortal after, the towers built toward heaven that provoked divine scattering, the me, the divine powers and knowledge that were kept under lock and key in Enki's temple and had to be stolen by the goddess Inanna to reach humanity. We'll examine these not as mythology in the dismissive sense, but as the Sumerians' own understanding of their relationship with those they called the Anunnaki. And we'll ask the question the texts themselves seem to pose. If humanity was created to serve, what happened when humanity began to think? When workers developed wisdom? When servants started asking questions? The pattern is there, preserved in the most permanent library humanity ever created. Words pressed into clay, before the clay was set hard by fire, indestructible, waiting in museum vaults and archaeological archives, waiting to be read, not for what we think ancient people believed, but for what they actually said they remembered. Let's begin where memory itself begins, before the cities rose from the alluvial plain of southern Mesopotamia, before the first ziggurat reached toward the sky, before the first king wore the crown, before the flood that reset everything. In those far remote times, as the tablets themselves phrase it, when kingship descended from heaven to earth, before the cities rose, the land between the rivers. That's what Mesopotamia means, the Greek name for the floodplain between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is now southern Iraq. 5,000 years ago, it looked nothing like the desert landscape that exists there today. The rivers meandered through reed marshes and fertile fields. Silt from annual floods renewed the soil. Game was plentiful. Fish filled the waterways. It was, by all archaeological accounts, one of the richest agricultural regions in the ancient world. And from this landscape, around 4000 BC, something extraordinary emerged. The Sumerians appear in the archaeological record during what scholars call the Uruk period, named for the city that would become the largest urban centre of its time. But appear is perhaps the wrong word, because it implies sudden arrival, and the truth is more complex. The earliest settlement layers at Uruk and other southern Mesopotamian sites show gradual development from small farming villages to something unprecedented in human history: cities, dense urban populations, monumental architecture, specialized labor, administrative systems, and writing. Not pictographs like those that appeared earlier in other cultures, not simple accounting marks, but a fully developed script capable of recording complex language, abstract thought, legal contracts, religious texts, mathematical calculations, astronomical observations, medical diagnoses, architectural plans, literary works, and historical chronicles. The cuneiform writing system appears in the archaeological record around 3200 BCE, seemingly complete. By 2600 BC, the early dynastic period, Sumerian scribes were producing sophisticated literature, including the instructions of Shuruppak, a wisdom text that would be copied and studied for over 1,000 years. This is not the slow evolution of communication that characterized human development everywhere else. This is, as multiple archaeologists have noted with puzzlement, too fast. The city of Uruk itself covered 6 square kilometres at its peak, larger than many medieval European cities 3,000 years later. Its walls, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, were walked by the king himself to inspect their majesty, go up on the wall of Uruk and walk around, inspect the foundation platform and scrutinise the brickwork. Those walls existed. Archaeologists have traced their foundations. They enclosed a city of perhaps 50,000 people at a time, when most human settlements numbered in the hundreds. But it's the Weld-Blundell prism that raises the most unsettling questions about Sumerian civilization's origins. Catalogue number WB444, housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. It's a clay prism about 20 centimetres tall, inscribed on all 4 sides with what has come to be known as the Sumerian king list. Dated to approximately 1817 BC, it's a copy of a much older text. How much older, no one knows for certain, but the content it preserves describes events that, if they occurred, predate the prism itself by more than 1,000 years. The king list begins. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, not when humans first organised into hierarchies, not when the strongest took power. The kingship descended from heaven. It was given, transmitted, received from above. Then come the names. 8 kings who ruled 5 Sumerian cities before the flood, and their reigns: Alulim of Eridu, 28,800 years, Alalungar of Eridu, 36,000 years, Emiluana of Bad Tibera, 43,200 years, Emingalana of Bad Tibera, 28,800 years, Dumazid of Bad Tibera, 36,000 years, Insipsian of Larak, 28,800 years, Emenjarana of Sippar, 21,000 years, Ubatutu of Shurupak, 18,600 years, total 241,200 years of kingship before the flood swept over the earth. Mainstream scholarship treats these numbers as purely symbolic, numerological constructs reflecting Sumerian-based 60 mathematics. Each number is a multiple of 3600, called a sar in Sumerian. The numbers are wrong, we're told, because people don't live 28,800 years, obviously. Therefore, they must mean something else. Royal years, generational lengths, astronomical cycles, anything but what they literally state. But the Sumerians themselves gave no indication they considered these numbers symbolic. They listed these antediluvian kings in the same document using the same formula as the historical kings who came after the flood. Gilgamesh, who definitely existed as a ruler of Uruk around 2700 BC, is listed with a reign of 126 years, still long by modern standards, but not impossibly long. The pattern is consistent. Before the flood, lifespans are measured in tens of thousands of years. After the flood, they drop dramatically but remain elevated. By the time of historically verified kings in the late 3rd millennium, we're dealing with recognizable human lifespans. Something changed at the flood. The king list is explicit about this. Then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, when the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The kingship was lowered from heaven again, not reinvented by humans, not seized by the strong, lowered, given, as if those who dispensed it had recalculated what humanity needed, or what humanity could be safely allowed. Archaeologists have found evidence of catastrophic flooding in the stratigraphy of multiple Sumerian cities, water-laid silt deposits several meters thick appearing suddenly in the early dynastic period, separating earlier settlement layers from later ones. The floods weren't universal across the entire region, and they didn't all occur simultaneously, which complicates any attempt to identify the flood referenced in mythology. But the evidence of significant inundations is undeniable. Something happened. Cities were abandoned, populations relocated, and when civilization resumed, it resumed with different parameters. The Sumerians themselves clearly believed there was a world before the flood and a different world after. The text described the antediluvian period as a time when things worked differently. The instructions of Shurupak, the wisdom text composed in the early dynastic period, is framed as the advice of Shurupak, son of Ubatutu, the last antediluvian king, given to his son Ziusudra. Ziusudra, according to the flood narrative on tablet CBS 1673, is the man who survives the flood by building a boat on divine instruction. He's the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, but older by at least a millennium. The structure is revealing. Wisdom from before the flood, transmitted to the flood survivor, preserved for those who come after. Knowledge that spans the great rupture. Instructions for living in a world where the rules have changed, given by someone who remembered when they were different. What were those rules? What was different before the flood? The king list suggests one answer: longevity. Those who ruled before the flood were either fundamentally different beings, or they lived in conditions that permitted lifespans incomprehensible to later generations. If we take the text at face value, and it's worth asking why we shouldn't, given that it correctly identifies real cities, real geographical relationships, and a historical sequence later confirmed by archaeology, then the antediluvian world was populated by rulers who accumulated wisdom and experience across tens of thousands of years. And then, as the flood narratives consistently describe, they were wiped out deliberately. The instructions of Shurupak don't explain why the flood came. The text focuses on practical advice: don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't build your house on a public road. But embedded in the instructions is the awareness of catastrophe. The father knows something terrible is coming. He's preparing his son for survival in a world that will be diminished from what it was. Other texts are more explicit. The Atrahasis epic, composed in Old Babylonian Akkadian, but based on earlier Sumerian traditions, describes the divine motivation. The land became wide, the people became numerous. The land bellowed like a bull, the god was disturbed by their uproar. Enlil heard their noise and addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too much. I am losing sleep over their racket, not sin, not wickedness, not moral corruption, noise, activity, multiplication, expansion. The gods, particularly Enlil, supreme deity of the pantheon, found humanity's sheer vitality to be intolerable. First, they sent plague. It didn't work. Humanity recovered. They sent drought. Humanity adapted. They sent famine. Humanity endured. Finally, they sent the flood, designed to accomplish what the other interventions had failed to achieve, reducing humanity to manageable numbers. A reset, a culling. But even the flood didn't eliminate humanity entirely. Enki, the god of wisdom, warned his chosen human servant. A boat was built. Survivors endured. And when the waters receded and the gods saw that humanity persisted, they had to make accommodation. They couldn't remove humans entirely, who would maintain the temples, who would perform the offerings, who would do the work the gods had created them for, but they could impose limitations. The post-flood world, according to these texts, operates under different constraints. Lifespans are reduced. Knowledge is controlled. The me, those divine powers and prerogatives, are kept under guard. Humanity continues, but within boundaries. This is not how other ancient creation myths work. In Greek mythology, humans are punished by Zeus for accepting fire from Prometheus, but the punishment is the introduction of evils via Pandora's box, not the reduction of human capabilities. In the biblical Genesis account, humans are expelled from Eden for eating from the tree of knowledge, but God fears they might then eat from the tree of life and become like one of us. So he posts cherubim with a flaming sword to guard against that possibility. The problem is human aspiration toward divine status, and the solution is prevention of further advancement. The Sumerian texts describe something similar but more systematic. Not just prevention of a single transgression, but ongoing management of a created species that keeps threatening to exceed its intended function. The tablets describe this from the Sumerian perspective. These aren't Enki's journals or Enlil's administrative records. They're human accounts of what humans believed about their origins and their relationship with those they called gods. Whether those gods were divine beings in a theological sense, whether they were technologically advanced visitors from elsewhere, whether they were tribal memories of exceptionally long-lived ancestors, the texts don't clarify. And our purpose here isn't to impose interpretation. What matters is what the Sumerians themselves said they understood. They were created entities, fashioned for a purpose, and that purpose was not equality with their creators. When they began to approach that equality through numbers, through knowledge, through unified action, intervention occurred. Reduction, reset, reimposition of boundaries. The flood was the most dramatic intervention, but as we'll see, it wasn't the only one. The pattern repeats across the entire corpus of Sumerian religious and historical texts, and to understand that pattern, we need to understand how we even have access to these texts in the first place, how clay tablets buried under desert sand for thousands of years became readable documents, how a dead language was resurrected, how we moved from ignorance to understanding in just 2 centuries. Because the Sumerians themselves created the most permanent library in human history. They wrote on clay, and clay doesn't rot. It doesn't burn. In fact, fire makes it harder, more durable. It can survive buried in earth for 5,000 years and emerge readable. They preserved their knowledge in the only medium that could guarantee it would last until someone capable of understanding it came along to dig it up and decode it, almost as if they knew someone someday would need to read what they had written. The Mesopotamian scribal tradition. Imagine trying to read a book in a language you don't speak, written in a script you've never seen, describing a culture you know nothing about. That was the challenge facing scholars in the mid-19th century when the first cuneiform tablets began arriving at European museums from archaeological excavations in Iraq. The script itself, wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay, was recognised as writing, but no one knew what it said. The tablets had been coming out of Mesopotamian mounds for decades, sold by local diggers to travellers and diplomats. By the 1840s, thousands sat in museum collections, cryptic and silent. The breakthrough came through trilingual inscriptions, texts written in 3 languages on the same monument, most notably the Behistun inscription in western Iran, a massive rock carving created by the Persian king Darius I around 520 BCE. The inscription recorded the same message in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Old Persian, being distantly related to European languages, was deciphered first by Georg Friedrich Grotefend and Henry Rawlinson between 1802 and 1847. Once they could read the Persian, they could use it as a key to unlock the Babylonian. Babylonian was written in cuneiform, but it was a Semitic language related to Hebrew and Arabic. With enormous effort, linguists began working out the grammar, building vocabularies, identifying grammatical patterns. By the 1850s, Babylonian cuneiform was readable, not easily, not completely, but well enough to extract meaning from texts. But Sumerian was different. Many of the tablets from southern Mesopotamia weren't written in Babylonian. They were written in another language entirely, one that predated Babylonian by more than 1,000 years. A language unrelated to any known language family. No one spoke it anymore. No one had spoken it since roughly 1800 BC, when it died out as a living tongue, even though it continued to be used as a scholarly and religious language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. The decipherment of Sumerian took until the early 20th century to achieve even basic reliability. It was one of the most difficult linguistic achievements in history. There are still debates about certain grammatical structures and vocabulary items, but by the 1920s, scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer could read Sumerian texts with reasonable confidence and begin translating the massive corpus of tablets that had been excavated from sites like Nippur, Lagash, and Uruk. What they found astonished them. The Sumerians had developed the Aduba, literally tablet house, the scribal school, where young boys and occasionally girls, though this was rare, were trained in the complex art of cuneiform writing. These schools operated from at least 2500 BC through the end of Mesopotamian civilization in the 1st century C, an educational institution spanning 2,500 years. Students learned by copying texts, standard texts. The same literary works, hymns, proverbs, and epics were copied over and over again across centuries. This wasn't just memorization, this was replication of exact wording, passed down through generations of teachers and students. The texts were sacred not just in religious content, but in form. Get a word wrong, and you copied it again until you had it right. This method of transmission, exact copying across centuries, means that when we read a Sumerian literary text from 2100 BC, and then read a Babylonian copy of the same text from 1700 BC, we can verify consistency. When words change, it's identifiable. When new elements are added, they stand out. The scribal tradition was designed to preserve, and what it preserved was a massive library. The Penn Museum alone holds approximately 25,000 cuneiform tablets from its Nippur excavations. The British Museum has more than 130,000. The Louvre, the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, the Iraq Museum, the Yale Babylonian Collection, major institutions across the world hold collections numbering in the tens of thousands. Many remain unstudied. Many have been catalogued but not translated. The work continues. The Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature, SECSL, a project at the University of Oxford that operated from 1997 to 2006, created reliable English translations of the major Sumerian literary works, complete with scholarly apparatus showing variant readings from different manuscript copies. It's the gold standard for accessing these texts. When I cite an ECCSL reference number, you can go online and read the exact text yourself, see the original Sumerian, compare different versions. The texts divide into categories: administrative records, millions of these, tracking grain storage, labour assignments, temple offerings, legal contracts, sales, marriages, divorces, adoptions, letters, personal and official correspondence, medical texts describing diagnoses and treatments, mathematical texts with complex calculations, astronomical observations tracking Venus's movements, omen collections predicting the future based on sheep livers or oil patterns in water. And then the literary texts, myths, epics, hymns, lamentations, wisdom literature. This is where we find the material relevant to our investigation, because embedded in these religious and literary texts is the Sumerian understanding of their own origins, their relationship with the divine realm, and the events that shape their world. The texts cluster around certain themes: creation, flood, divine kingship, the relationship between gods and humans, and consistently, across these thematically related texts from different periods and different cities, we find patterns. One pattern stands out more clearly than any other. Humanity was created with a specific, limited purpose, and attempts to exceed that purpose triggered divine intervention. Let's trace this pattern through the texts themselves, starting with creation. The Barton cylinder, CBS 8383, excavated at Nippur, dating to the mid to late 3rd millennium BC, contains one of the earliest Sumerian creation accounts. It's fragmentary, but what survives describes the separation of heaven and earth, the creation of humans, and the establishment of divine order. The language is dense and archaic even by Sumerian standards, full of terms whose exact meanings remain debated. But the basic structure is clear: gods create world, gods create humans, humans serve gods. The Atrahasis epic, though written in Old Babylonian Akkadian around 1650 BCE, draws on earlier Sumerian traditions. It's remarkably explicit about why humans were created. The younger gods, the Agigi, were doing the hard labour of digging irrigation canals, maintaining creation, keeping the cosmos running. They revolted. They threw down their tools and marched to the palace of Enlil, the supreme god. We cannot bear the toil. The work is too hard, the distress too much. Enlil wanted to destroy the rebellious Igigi. Enki proposed a better solution: create humans to do the work instead. The goddess Mami, also called Nintu or Ninasag, the mother goddess, would fashion new beings from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god. Specifically, the blood of Waila, one of the rebels, so that humans would carry divine intelligence sufficient to understand instructions, but would remain fundamentally created, not creator. Mami performs the creation. Enki opened his mouth and addressed the great gods. On the 1st, 7th, and 15th days of the month, let me establish a purification, a bath. Let one god be slaughtered, then let the gods be purified by immersion. Let Nintu mix clay with his flesh and blood. Let God and man be mixed together in the clay. The procedure is precise, medical, almost clinical. Clay, the basic matter, combined with divine blood to produce beings capable of thought but limited in scope. The mixture is deliberate. Too much divine substance and humans might rival gods. Too little and they'd be useless as workers. The balance is calculated. The text continues, "From the flesh of the god, let a spirit remain. Let it make the living know its sign, lest he be allowed to be forgotten. Let the spirit remain." This is crucial. The divine element in humans is acknowledged. We're made from god blood, but it's also contained, controlled. It has a specific function to enable understanding of instructions. Lest he be allowed to be forgotten suggests the divine part serves as a reminder of who created humanity and for what purpose. 14 wombs are formed, 7 males, 7 females, the first humans, and immediately they're put to work. You have slaughtered the god who had intelligence. You have relieved the gods of their hard work. You have imposed the load on man. The language is unambiguous. This is not creation for fellowship. This is not let us make man in our image with the implication of beloved children. This is labour transfer. The gods were tired. They wanted rest. Solution, create a workforce. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, dated to roughly 1200 BC, but based on older traditions, tells a similar story from a Babylonian rather than Sumerian perspective. After the young god Marduk defeats Tiamat and creates the cosmos from her corpse, he decides to create humans. The stated purpose: I will create Lulu, man be his name. I will form Lulu man. Let him be burdened with the toil of the gods, that they may rest. Tablet the 6 is explicit. It was Chingu who instigated warfare, who made Tiamat rebel and set battle in motion. They bound him and held him before Ea. They imposed the penalty on him and shed his blood. From his blood he created mankind. He imposed the toil of the gods and set the gods free. Again, humans created from divine blood, Chingus, the rebel general, mixed with clay. Again, the explicit purpose is to relieve gods of labour. He imposed the toil of the gods and set the gods free. These are not fringe texts. They're mainstream Mesopotamian religious literature, copied and studied across 2 millennia. Schoolboys in the Aduba memorized these passages. Priests recited them in temples. Kings commissioned new copies. The theology they express was foundational to Mesopotamian civilization's self-understanding, and that theology states clearly, humans are created beings fashioned by higher intelligences for the purpose of performing work those higher intelligences no longer wish to do themselves. Now this raises an immediate question. If humans were designed as workers, why give them any divine intelligence at all? Why not make them purely instinctual, like oxen or sheep? Why mix in god blood? The text suggests an answer. The work required understanding, maintaining temples, performing rituals correctly, understanding agricultural cycles, building cities according to divine specifications, managing complex irrigation systems. This required intelligence, problem-solving ability, communication skills, memory. But intelligence is dangerous, because intelligence doesn't stay within prescribed boundaries. Intelligent beings learn, they innovate, they ask questions, they develop their own purposes beyond the purposes they were given. This is exactly what happens in the myths. Humanity begins as servants. But humanity doesn't stay servants. They multiply, they build cities, they develop arts and sciences. They become noisy. The Atrahasis text emphasizes this repeatedly. Noisy with activity, with civilization, with ambition. And this noise disturbs Enlil. The text describes his complaints across multiple interventions. First plague, the people became numerous across the earth. The god was disturbed by their uproar. Enlil heard their noise. He addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too much. I cannot rest because of their racket. Enki secretly provides the cure. Humanity survives, multiplies again. Drought, same complaint. Same solution by Enki. Same survival. Famine, same pattern. Finally, Enlil decides on a comprehensive solution. Flood. Total destruction. Wipe the slate clean. He makes the other gods swear not to warn humanity. Enki, however, finds a loophole. He speaks to the wall of his human servant Atrahasis' house. Technically not speaking to Atrahasis himself, giving instructions to build a boat. The flood comes. Humanity is destroyed, except for Atrahasis and his household. When the waters recede and the gods realize humans have survived, they're furious, initially. But then they smell the sacrifice Atrahasis offers, and they remember they need humans. Who will maintain the temples? Who will provide offerings? Who will do the work? Enlil accepts the situation, but imposes new restrictions. The text is fragmentary here, but scholars reconstruct rules limiting human reproduction, introducing infant mortality, establishing barren women, creating categories of priestesses forbidden to bear children. Population control mechanisms. Humanity can continue, but within limits. This is the pattern. Creation for servitude, development beyond servitude, divine intervention, new restrictions, accommodation but within boundaries, and the mechanism of control throughout these texts centers on one thing more than any other: knowledge, specifically the me. The transaction at Eridu. In Sumerian cosmology, there existed a set of divine decrees, powers, offices, and cultural elements known as the me. The word itself, me, pronounced may, is one of those Sumerian terms that resists clean translation. Divine decree captures part of it. Cosmic order gets closer. But the me were more concrete than abstract principles. They were things, objects, physical items that could be stored, moved, stolen, displayed. We know this from the myth Inanna and Enki, the transfer of the arts of civilization from Eridu to Uruk, catalogued as ECSL 1.3.1. It's one of the most important texts for understanding how the Sumerians conceived of knowledge, power, and civilization itself. The story begins in Eridu, the southernmost of the Sumerian cities, believed to be the first city where kingship descended from heaven. Eridu was the cult center of Enki, god of wisdom, magic, crafts, and the freshwater abyss, called the Abzu. Enki's temple, the Abzu, House of the Abyss, was where the me were kept. Inanna, goddess of love, war, and the city of Uruk, decides she wants these me for her own city. She travels to Eridu in her boat of heaven, approaching Enki with reverence and apparent innocence. Enki, delighted by his daughter's visit, prepares a feast. They drink beer. This detail appears repeatedly. Beer was sacred in Mesopotamian culture, a gift of civilization itself. As Enki becomes drunk, Inanna sees her opportunity. The text describes what happens next across multiple sections, with formulaic repetition. Enki, in his intoxicated state, begins offering the me to Inanna. Enki says to Inanna, "In the name of my power, in the name of my Abzu, I will give them to holy Inanna, the high priesthood, godship, the noble and enduring crown, the throne of kingship." Inanna accepts. Holy Inanna took them. Enki continues, "I will give you the exalted scepter, staffs, the exalted shrine, shepherdship, kingship." She took them. The list goes on. The text catalogues over 60 me that Enki gives to Inanna: truthfulness, descent to the underworld, ascent from the underworld, sexual intercourse, prostitution, the art of lovemaking, the cult chamber, music, musical instruments, eldership, heroship, power, enmity, straightforwardness, the destruction of cities, lamentation, rejoicing, falsehood, the craft of the metalworker, scribal arts, the craft of the smith, the craft of the leather worker, the craft of the builder, the craft of the basket weaver, wisdom, attention, holy purification, fear, terror, strife, peace, weariness, victory, counsel, the troubled heart, judgment, decision-making. These aren't just abstractions. They're presented as transferable, portable. Inanna literally loads them into her boat. The text is explicit. She took the me. She placed them in the boat. She gave them to the boat. This happens repeatedly as Enki, growing more inebriated, continues dispensing me. Then Enki passes out. When he wakes, he realizes what he's done. He calls his servant Isimud, "My minister, my sweet name of heaven, where are my me?" Isimud replies, "My master gave them to his daughter." Enki is horrified. He's given away the fundamental sources of divine power and civilized order. He immediately sends his servant with various monsters and demons to pursue Inanna and retrieve the me. The chase scene occupies much of the myth. At each stopping point along the waterway from Eridu to Uruk, Enki's emissaries catch up to Inanna and demand return of the me. Each time, Inanna's assistant Ninshubur confronts them and drives them back. The me remain with Inanna. Finally, she reaches Uruk. She displays the me to her people. Inanna addressed the people there, "Come, I will tell you what my father gave me. He gave me the high priesthood, godship, the noble and enduring crown." And the list is repeated, all 60 plus me, as Inanna triumphantly presents them in the city square. The myth ends with Enki reluctantly accepting the situation. Inanna has successfully transferred civilization from Eridu to Uruk. The Mi are now in human space rather than locked in the god's temple. Several elements of this myth are crucial for our investigation. First, the Mi exist. They're real within the framework of the story. They're not metaphorical. They're stored in a specific location, Enki's Iabzu temple in Eridu. They can be moved. They can be displayed. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have revealed massive temple complexes dating back to the Ubaid period, 5300–4000, making it one of the oldest religious sites in Mesopotamia. Whatever the Iabzu actually was, it was a real place, and something was kept there that the Sumerians considered profoundly important. Second, the Mi include both admirable and terrible things, victory and enmity, truth and falsehood, peace and strife. The destruction of cities is a Mi. This suggests the Sumerians understood that civilization, real civilization, not idealized civilization, includes darkness. Power includes the power to destroy. Knowledge includes knowledge of violence. Third, the Mi were not originally accessible to humanity. They were under divine control. Enki kept them. He dispensed them according to his will, or, in this case, according to his drunken judgment. Inanna has to steal them. She doesn't ask permission and get it granted. She gets Enki drunk and takes advantage of his impaired state to extract what he would not have given sober. The theft motif is significant. It appears in other mythologies, Prometheus stealing fire from Zeus, for example, but here it's framed not as rebellion against tyranny, but as clever appropriation of what was being withheld. Enki isn't depicted as cruel or unjust. He's depicted as guardian of dangerous knowledge, and Inanna has to circumvent that guardianship. Fourth, once Inanna has the Mi, she brings them to Uruk, a human city. She doesn't keep them in her temple inaccessible to worshippers. She displays them publicly. "I will tell you what my father gave me," she announces. Transparency, distribution, knowledge made available. The historical correlation is striking. Uruk is where writing develops. Uruk is where the first monumental architecture appears. Uruk is where we see evidence of specialized crafts, metalworking, stone carving, textile production at a level of sophistication not present in earlier settlements. Uruk is where civilization, as we understand the term, crystallizes, and the Sumerians' own myth about this development frames it as theft from the gods. Now there's a tension in the mythology around Enki. In the Atrahasis epic, he's the god who consistently helps humanity, providing cures for plagues, teaching irrigation, warning Atrahasis about the flood. He seems to be humanity's advocate among the gods. Yet here he's keeping the Mi locked away, requiring Inanna to trick him into releasing them. The resolution of this tension might lie in Enki's role as god of wisdom. Wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's understanding of consequences. Enki knows what humans are capable of. He knows that giving them the Mi, especially the dangerous Mi, the craft of warfare, the destruction of cities, the tools of power, is risky. He's not withholding out of cruelty, but out of calculation. And perhaps his drunkenness in the Inanna myth isn't literal. Perhaps it's a way of framing inevitable transfer as accident rather than choice. Enki can't be seen as deliberately empowering humanity beyond what the other gods approve, but he can be seen as making a mistake while intoxicated. The myth provides him plausible deniability. Regardless of interpretation, the result is clear: the Mi transfer to human space. Civilization develops. And with that development comes the problem the gods had worried about from the beginning. Humans with knowledge don't stay in their assigned role. We see this play out in another category of Mi, the Tablet of Destinies. This isn't in the list Inanna steals. It's apparently too important to be among even those Mi, but it appears across multiple myths as the supreme symbol of cosmic authority. The Tablet of Destinies, sometimes plural, sometimes singular, grants its holder the power to decree fate, to determine the order of reality itself. In the Enuma Elish, Tiamat gives it to Chingu as a breastplate. Your utterance shall never be altered. Let the command from your lips be as unalterable as Anu's. When Marduk defeats Chingu, he takes the tablet. He took from him the tablet of destinies, which should not have been his. He sealed it with a seal and fastened it on his breast. Possession of the tablet equals supreme authority. Without it, even Enlil cannot function as king of the gods. This becomes the plot of the myth Ninurta and Anzu. The Anzu bird, a divine creature, part eagle and part lion, serves in Enlil's temple. One day while Enlil is bathing, Anzu sees the tablet of destinies hanging in the shrine and steals it. He sees the tablet of destinies in his hands. He took away the Elil power. Rites were abandoned. Anzu flew off and went into hiding in his mountain. With the tablet in Anzu's possession, the divine order collapses. Fate cannot be decreed. Commands have no force. The gods are paralyzed. They send multiple champions to fight Anzu and recover the tablet. But with the tablet's power, Anzu is invincible. Any weapon sent against him simply vanishes when he commands it. Finally, Ninurta, god of war and hunting, devises a strategy. He shoots arrows not at Anzu, but at his wings, targeting the feathers that enable flight. When Anzu falls, Ninurta seizes the tablet and returns it to Enlil. Order is restored. The myth ends with Ninurta being given supreme titles and authority as reward for saving divine kingship. The point, even among the gods, control of the tablet of destinies is the ultimate prize and the ultimate danger. Its theft causes cosmic chaos. Its recovery is the highest achievement, and nowhere in any Sumerian or Akkadian text is a human ever given access to it. Humans receive the me. Humans learn crafts, laws, music, judgment, but the tablet of destinies remains forever in divine hands. That level of power is not transferred. That boundary is not crossed. When humans do attempt to reach toward that level, when they build toward heaven, when they unify their purpose, when they approach divine capability, intervention occurs. But before we examine those interventions, we need to understand exactly what the creation texts say about why humans were made in the first place. Because the purpose of creation determines the problem of exceeding that purpose. And the texts are remarkably clear about this. Uncomfortable clear, uncomfortably explicit, created to serve. The Atrahasis epic doesn't hide its theology behind metaphor. Tablet Wine describes a situation before humanity exists. The universe is functioning, the cosmos is ordered, but someone has to do the physical work of maintaining it, digging canals, dredging rivers, maintaining boundaries between land and water, building infrastructure. The younger gods, the Ejigi, were assigned this labour by the Anunnaki, the senior gods. For 3,600 years, one Sa in Sumerian calculation, the Ejigi worked. They dug the Tigris, they dug the Euphrates, they excavated the marshes. The text describes this labour in detail. The gods were digging the watercourses. They were piling up their silt on heaps. The gods were counting the years of their labour, 3,600 years of digging. Then they revolted. They said as they were digging watercourses, "Come, let us confront our chamberlain, so that he may remove this heavy burden from us." The counsellor of the gods, the hero, "Come, let us unsettle him in his dwelling." Enlil, the counsellor of the gods, the hero, "Come, let us unsettle him in his dwelling." They burned their tools. They marched by night to Enlil's palace. They surrounded it. Enlil, terrified, sent word to Anu in heaven and to Enki in the Abzu, "They have surrounded my door. They have surrounded the dwelling." Anu descends. An assembly convenes. Enlil wants to destroy the rebels. Anu asks why they're revolting. A spokesman explains, "The burden is too much for us. The excavation work is hard. The misery is too much." Enki proposes the solution. While the birth goddess is present, let her create a mortal man so that he may bear the yoke. So that he may bear the yoke, the work of Enlil, so that man may bear the load of the gods. Notice the phrasing, not let us create companions, or let us make beings to share the world with. The purpose is work, bearing yokes, bearing loads. Labour transfer. The birth goddess, called Mami, also known as Nintu, Ninhusag, Belet Ili depending on the text, agrees but needs assistance. Enki provides the method: on the 1st, 7th and 15th of the month, let me establish a purification, a bath. Let one god be slaughtered, so that all the gods may be cleansed by immersion. From his flesh and blood let Nintu mix clay. The god chosen for slaughter is Wei-Ila, identified as having personality or intelligence. The Akkadian term is Temu, related to consciousness and rational thought. His slaughter isn't punishment, it's functional. His divine blood provides the intelligence component humans will need. Mami mixes the clay and blood. She mixed clay in his presence from his flesh and blood. She let the god and man be thoroughly mixed in the clay. The procedure is repeated 14 times. 7 male and 7 female forms are created. Birth goddesses carry them to term, and the first humans emerge. And immediately they're put to work. You have slaughtered the god together with his intelligence. You have killed the Lama protective spirit and removed the hard toil. You have imposed the work on man. The language throughout this section emphasizes burden transfer. The gods are relieved, humans are burdened. This is the explicit purpose of creation. The Enuma Elish tells the same story with different details. After Marduk defeats Tiamat and creates the cosmos, he announces, "Blood I will knead and make bones be. I will create a human, man will be his name. I will create humankind. They will bear the burden of the gods, that the gods may rest." Tablet 6. When Marduk heard the speech of the gods, he conceived a desire to do clever things. He spoke to Ea, saying to him the plan that he was considering: "I will knead blood and make bones be. I will set up man as a designation. Truly man will be created. He will be charged with the service of the gods, that they might have peace." Again, service. Peace for the gods, work for humans. Chingu, Tiamat's general, wearer of the Tablet of Destinies during the war, is selected as the sacrifice. They bound him and held him before Ea. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood he created mankind. He imposed the toil of the gods and released the gods from it. The pattern is identical to Atrahasis. Divine blood mixed with clay. Intelligence granted for functional purposes. Burden transferred. Both texts present this theology without apology. The Mesopotamian cosmos operates on labour. Someone has to maintain it. The younger gods didn't want to do it anymore. Humans were created as the solution to a labour shortage. This isn't how we typically think about creation. Modern religious frameworks, particularly those influenced by Genesis, emphasize humanity as beloved creation, made in the divine image, granted dominion over the earth as stewards and representatives. Even in traditions that emphasize human unworthiness, there's still the underlying concept that humans have value to the divine beyond mere utility. The Mesopotamian texts don't pretend this, or rather, the Mesopotamians didn't pretend it. These were their sacred texts, copied in their schools, recited in their temples. This was their understanding of their place in the cosmos they were created to serve. The gods needed workers. They made workers. Those workers were given sufficient intelligence to perform complex tasks, but were fundamentally and permanently in a subordinate position. Yet something happened. The texts themselves document it. Humans exceeded their programming. The Atrahasis epic continues after the creation scene. Time passes. Humans multiply. They build cities. They develop culture. And they become noisy. This noise complaint appears repeatedly. It's not metaphorical. The text uses specific words, rigmu, wu, buru, and emphasizes that it's the sound itself that disturbs Enlil. The land became wide, the people became numerous, the land bellowed like a bull. The god was disturbed by their uproar. What does it mean for people to be noisy? In context, it means activity, civilization, movement, building, trading, talking, living. the sound of a functioning society. But why would this disturb a god? Why would the supreme deity of the pantheon lose sleep over human activity? One possibility: the noise represents something deeper than sound. It represents autonomy, humans going about their business, developing their own purposes, creating their own culture, beyond merely serving divine needs. The noise is evidence of human civilization developing its own momentum. Another possibility: the texts mean exactly what they say. The gods lived in the temples. Temples were in the cities. Cities were noisy with human activity. The gods, physically present in some sense, were disturbed by constant human racket. Either way, the solution is the same: reduce the human population, restore quiet, re-establish control. The plague fails, drought fails, famine fails. These reduce populations temporarily, but humans recover and multiply again. Finally, Enlil decides on comprehensive solution: flood. He makes the gods swear not to warn humanity. The text describes the oath, taking in detail. Enlil knows that Enki, in particular, will want to save his human favourites. So he binds all the gods. Let the gods agree to the command. You gods swear by the oath of heaven and earth. But Enki finds his loophole. He can't speak to his human servant Atrahasis directly, but he can speak to the wall of Atrahasis' house. Wall, listen to me. Read, wall, pay attention to my words. Flee the house, build a boat. Abandon possessions and save life. The boat which you build, her dimensions should be equal, her length and breadth should be the same. Atrahasis builds the boat. The flood comes. The text describes it in vivid detail. The storm was terrifying. The deluge blew like a battle wind. The tempest covered the land. For 7 days and 7 nights the flood swept over the land. The huge boat tossed about on the great waters. All humanity dies except those on the boat. When the flood ends and the waters recede, Atrahasis emerges and offers sacrifice. The gods smell the offering. They haven't eaten in a week, since all their human servants drowned, and they gather around like flies. The text is almost mocking here the mighty gods, reduced to scavengers hovering over a sacrificial fire because they're starving. Enlil arrives and is furious that humans survive. He confronts Enki. All of us great Anunnaki decided on the deluge. We swore an oath together that life would not escape. How did man survive the catastrophe? Enki defends himself with technicalities. He didn't directly tell Atrahasis, he spoke to a wall. He didn't violate the oath, he just interpreted it creatively. And besides, look at the result. The gods are hungry. They need humans. Complete extinction was a mistake. Enlil eventually accepts this, but imposes restrictions. The text is fragmentary here, but scholars reconstruct new rules governing human reproduction. The goddess Mami proclaims, in addition to this, let there be a third category among the people. Among the people shall be the woman who has borne and the woman who has not borne. Let there be the Paitu demon among the people to snatch the baby from the lap of her who bore it. Establish high priestesses and devotees who shall be taboo and so stop childbirth. Population control, not through complete destruction, but through managed limitation. Infant mortality, barren women, celibate priestesses, mechanisms to prevent human numbers from becoming unmanageable again. This is how the Mesopotamians understood the post-flood world. Humans survived, but under restrictions. The gods needed servants, but those servants would be kept within boundaries. And the primary boundary was knowledge, because intelligence was the problem. The Igigi rebelled because they could understand their situation and organise resistance. Humans became noisy because they could think, plan, build, create beyond mere obedience. The divine blood that granted Temu consciousness enabled exactly the autonomy that made humanity dangerous. But that intelligence was also necessary. Stupid servants can't maintain temples, can't perform complex rituals, can't develop the arts and crafts the gods required. The solution: grant knowledge in portions, control access to the me. Keep the most powerful knowledge, the the Tablet of Destinies, the ability to decree fate permanently out of human reach. And when humans managed to acquire knowledge they weren't supposed to have, through theft like Inanna, through teaching by rogue gods like Enki, through their own clever development, impose correction. The pattern appears across the entire corpus of Mesopotamian literature. It's not hidden, it's not subtle, it's the explicit framework of the relationship between divine and human realms. And nowhere is it more clear than in the story of Adapa, the wisdom that was forbidden. The Adapa legend survives in fragments from multiple periods and locations, which suggests it was an important story widely told across Mesopotamian civilization. The most complete version comes from tablets found in the library of the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III at Amarna, dating to the 14th century B, along with pieces from Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh and other sites. Adapa was the first sage. The texts call him the Sage of Eridu, connecting him to humanity's oldest city. He was a priest of Enki, performing daily rituals, tending the temple, providing offerings. And he was something unique among early humans. He possessed wisdom, not just intelligence. All humans had that from the divine blood in their making. Wisdom. The Akkadian term is nimeku, related to depth of understanding, comprehension of hidden things, knowledge of divine matters. The text states explicitly, Enki, the wise one, made him wise, disclosing the designs of the earth. To him he gave wisdom, eternal life he did not give him. That last phrase is critical. Wisdom, yes. Eternal life, no. Why the distinction? Why grant one but not the other? The text doesn't explain, but the implication is clear. Wisdom makes humans useful, capable of complex understanding and sophisticated action. Immortality makes humans equal to gods. Wisdom without immortality creates ideal servants, intelligent enough to be valuable but still fundamentally limited by death. Adapa's wisdom is considerable. He understands the proper behaviour of the gods, he knows rituals, he grasps mathematics, astronomy, the arts of civilization. He's literate. In fact, he may be the first literate human in Mesopotamian tradition. He's Enki's chief priest and advisor. One day Adapa is fishing in his boat, providing food for Enki's temple. The south wind rises and overturns his boat, throwing him into the water. Adapa, enraged, shouts a curse at the south wind, "South wind, I will break your wing." And he does. The text says, he broke the wing of the south wind. For 7 days the south wind did not blow upon the land. This is significant. Adapa, a human, has power over cosmic forces. He can affect the wind itself through spoken curse. This goes far beyond normal human capability. His wisdom includes magical power. Anu, the supreme sky god, notices that the south wind has stopped. He asks his vizier, why has the south wind not blown upon the land for 7 days? The vizier investigates and reports Adapa, the son of Ea, has broken her wing. Anu summons Adapa to heaven to answer for this. And here's where the story becomes truly interesting. Enki, Adapa's patron, learns of the summons. He knows Anu will be angry. He prepares Adapa with detailed instructions. Adapa, you are going before Anu the king. You will go up to heaven. When you have ascended to heaven and approached the gate of Anu, the gatekeeper will be stationed at the gate of Anu. Tammuz and Gazida will be standing at the gate of Anu. When they see you, they will ask you, man, for whom do you thus look? Man, for whose sake are you thus clad in mourning? You shall say to them, 2 gods have disappeared from our land, and it is for them that I am thus. The deception is clever. Enki is instructing Adapa to lie, to manipulate the gods he'll encounter. Enki continues, they will look at each other and laugh. They will speak a good word to Anu. They will present you before Anu in a favourable mood. The trick works. When Adapa reaches heaven and encounters Tammuz and Gazida, he performs exactly as instructed. They're flattered, the 2 gods he mentions are them, and they present him favourably to Anu. Anu, his anger diffused by this favourable presentation, questions Adapa, why did you break the wing of the south wind? Adapa explains, He was fishing for the temple. The wind overturned his boat. He spoke in anger. Anu accepts the explanation. And then Anu does something unexpected. He offers Adapa food and drink. But Enki had warned about this. When they offer you bread, do not eat it. When they offer you water, do not drink it. When they offer you a garment, put it on. When they offer you oil, anoint yourself. Adapa follows these instructions. When the food and drink are brought, he refuses them. He accepts the garment and oil, but rejects the bread and water. Anu is puzzled. Why did Adapa not eat or drink? He will not have eternal life. And then the devastating revelation, he brought for him the bread of life, he did not eat. He brought for him the water of life, he did not drink. Adapa had been offered immortality. The bread and water were not tests or tricks. They were the literal food and drink of eternal life. And he refused them on Enki's instruction. Anu sends him back to earth. Adapa, what have you done? You will not have eternal life. The food you refused was the food of life. The water you rejected was the water of life. Go back to your earth. Why did Enki deceive Adapa? Why instruct him to refuse the very gift that would make him equal to the gods? The text doesn't explain Enki's motivation. We're left to interpret. Several possibilities exist. 1. Enki genuinely thought Anu would trick Adapa with poisoned food. He was protecting his servant from what he assumed was a death trap. When it turned out to be genuine offer of immortality, Enki's protective deception accidentally cost Adapa eternal life. 2. Enki knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Anu would offer immortality, but he also knew that a human with both wisdom and eternal life would be unacceptable to the divine council. Better to have Adapa alive and mortal than to risk him being destroyed for becoming too godlike. 3. Enki was bound by rules. He couldn't directly grant Adapa immortality without permission from the Council of Gods. He could grant wisdom. That was within his purview as god of wisdom. But immortality required Anu's consent. By sending Adapa to refuse it, Enki technically obeyed the cosmic order while ensuring his favourite human remained maximally empowered within permitted boundaries. Whatever the motivation, the result is clear. Adapa possesses extraordinary wisdom, but remains mortal. He has power and understanding unprecedented among humans, but cannot transcend the fundamental limitation of death. The parallel to Genesis is striking. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and are expelled from Eden before they can eat from the tree of life. God explicitly states, "The man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden." In both narratives, the gods God grant knowledge but prevent immortality. The combination of wisdom and eternal life is forbidden to humans. One or the other, never both. But the Adapa story reveals something additional that's absent from Genesis. Adapa's power. He doesn't just know things, he can do things. He breaks the wing of the south wind with a word. His curse affects cosmic forces. This suggests that wisdom in the Mesopotamian understanding includes operational power. Knowledge isn't just information, it's capability, and that capability makes the gods nervous. The text concludes with Adapa returning to earth, still wise, still powerful within mortal limits, still serving as Enki's priest. And the story becomes a founding narrative. This is why humans, no matter how wise, must die. This is why knowledge exists but immortality doesn't. Not because humans are unworthy, but because the combination would make them equal to gods, and the gods will not permit equality. The Mesopotamian term for the first sages, the Apkallu, refers specifically to Adapa and 6 others who lived before the flood. These were humans taught by Enki, granted extraordinary wisdom, responsible for teaching civilization to humanity. They were, in later tradition, partly divine, often depicted in artwork as fish-human hybrids, connecting them to Enki's realm of the freshwater abyss. But even the Apkallu were mortal. Even they died. Their knowledge passed to human students who passed it to the next generation, but the teachers themselves vanished into death. unless you count the antediluvian kings. Because the Sumerian king list records 8 rulers who lived before the flood, and their lifespans weren't measured in decades or even centuries, they were measured in tens of thousands of years, long enough to be functionally immortal from a human perspective, long enough to accumulate wisdom across time spans incomprehensible to later generations. Were they actually immortal? Were they the same beings as the Apkallu? Were they hybrid, partly divine, thus possessing extended lifespans without being fully gods? The texts don't clearly answer this. What they do show is that before the flood, something was different. Lifespans were different. The relationship between divine and human was different. Knowledge transmission worked differently. And then the flood came, and everything changed. The post-flood world operates under new rules. Lifespans are reduced. Knowledge is controlled. And the mechanism of control is embodied in a physical object, the Tablet of Destinies, the Tablets of Destiny. In the Mesopotamian cosmos, authority wasn't abstract. It was physical, embodied, held. The supreme power in the universe, the ability to decree fate, to establish order, to command reality itself, resided in an object, the Tablet of Destinies. Sometimes the texts speak of it as singular, dupumti, Tablet of Destinies, sometimes plural, Tablets of Destinies. Whether one object or multiple isn't clear, but the function is consistent, whoever holds the tablet can decree what will be, and what is decreed cannot be changed. The Enuma Elish describes its power. When Tiamat gives it to Chingu, she exalted Chingu, made him greatest among them, conferring upon him leadership of the army, command of the assembly, the raising of weapons for battle, the direction of combat. She set him upon a throne, and said to him, I have cast the spell for you, and exalted you in the assembly of the gods. I have given into your hand the rule over all the gods. You shall be greatest, you my only spouse. Your pronouncement shall never be countermanded. She gave him the Tablet of Destinies, and fastened it to his breast. Your command shall not be altered. The word of your mouth shall be law. With the tablet, Chingu becomes supreme. His commands have cosmic force. His decrees shape reality. He leads the army of chaos against the younger gods with the authority of fate itself backing him. When Marduk defeats Chingu, his first act after killing him is to seize the tablet. He took from him the Tablet of Destinies, which should not rightfully have been his. He sealed it with his seal and fastened it on his own breast. Control of the tablet is more important than victory itself. The war isn't over until the tablet is secured, because without the tablet, divine authority collapses. This becomes the entire plot of the myth of Anzu. The story begins in Enlil's temple, the E-Kur, at Nippur. Enlil is supreme king of the gods, and his authority derives from possession of the Tablet of Destinies. The Anzu bird, a divine creature, eagle-headed, lion-bodied, massive and powerful, serves as guardian at the temple entrance. One morning, while Enlil is performing his ablutions, bathing in the sacred chamber, Anzu observes the tablet hanging in its place. The text describes his thoughts. I will take the divine Tablet of Destinies for myself, and control the commands of all the gods. I will make my throne firm, and be master of the cosmic order. I will direct the totality of the Igigi gods. Anzu seizes the tablet and flees to the mountains, and immediately cosmic order breaks down. He took away the Elil power. The rites of the gods were stopped. The brilliance was taken. Silence reigned. The gods of the land waited in their shrines. The shrines go dark. Rituals cease. The gods are paralyzed. Why? Because the tablet doesn't just symbolize authority, it is authority. Without it, commands have no force. Decrees have no power. The machinery of cosmic order stops functioning. Ea convenes an emergency assembly. The gods need a champion to fight Anzu and recover the tablet. But who can face an opponent who holds the Tablet of Destinies? Ea appeals to various gods. First, he asks Adad, the storm god. Adad refuses. Father, Who can rush off to the inaccessible mountain? Which of the gods, your sons, will be the conqueror of Anzu? For he has taken away the divine tablet of destinies for himself and control of the commands of all the gods. The problem is explicit. Anzu holds the tablet. Any weapon sent against him can be negated by his command. Any attack can be decreed null. Fighting him is fighting against fate itself. Several gods refuse the challenge. Finally, Ea appeals to Ninurta, the warrior god, son of Enlil. Ninurta's mother Mami encourages him, "My son, the Enlil power should not circulate outside. It must not come into alien hands. The god's divine plans should not be alienated." Ninurta agrees. He arms himself with weapons, 7 winds, the thunderbolt, arrows, lightning, and flies to the mountains to confront Anzu. The battle begins. Ninurta shoots arrows. But Anzu, holding the tablet, commands, "O shaft that has come, return to your reed thicket. Bow, back to your wood. Bowstring, back to the ram's gut. Arrows, back to your quiver." And the weapons vanish. They obey the command of the tablet holder. They return to their origins, becoming raw materials again. Ninurta retreats, reports to Ea, father, Anzu is commanding by means of the tablet, in his keeping, saying, "Let my pursuer's weapons return to the reed thicket." The arrows I shot at him stopped in front of him. Ea devises new strategy. He instructs Ninurta to use a wind wall to obscure Anzu's vision, then to aim not at Anzu himself, but at his wings. Shoot at his pinion, feathers with your arrows. Let feather and feather alike whirl around in confusion. Let wing after wing fall down and instill fear into him. Ninurta follows the strategy. He wounds Anzu's wings. The Anzu bird, unable to fly, falls from the sky. Ninurta seizes the tablet of destinies and returns it to Enlil. Order is restored. The shrines light up again. Rituals resume. The cosmic machinery restarts. And Ninurta is elevated to supreme status among the gods as reward for saving divine kingship. Several details are significant. First, the tablet is physical. It can be taken, it can be worn, it can be seized in battle. This isn't metaphorical. The Sumerians and Akkadians who created and transmitted these myths conceived of ultimate cosmic authority as residing in a tangible object. Second, possession equals power, regardless of legitimacy. Chingu receives the tablet from Tiamat and immediately gains supreme authority, even though he's leading the forces of chaos. Anzu steals the tablet and instantly becomes invincible, even though he's a usurper. The tablet doesn't care about righteousness. It responds to whoever holds it. Third, recovering the tablet requires cleverness, not just strength. Ninurta can't defeat Anzu through direct confrontation. The tablet's power negates any straightforward attack. Only by finding the tablet's limitations, it can't restore what's already destroyed, it can't reconstitute damaged wings, can Ninurta succeed. Fourth, humans are nowhere in this story. The tablet circulates among divine beings only. Humans don't possess it. Humans don't contest for it. Humans aren't even considered as potential holders. This is consistent across every text mentioning the Tablet of Destinies. It appears in divine hands. It's stolen by divine beings. It's fought over by gods. But it never enters human space. Compare this to the me. The me, the divine decrees and powers, transfer from divine to human space through Inanna. They're displayed publicly in Uruk. They become accessible, at least in principle, to humans who learn the crafts, perform the rituals, understand the arts. But not the Tablet of Destinies. That remains forever in divine hands. Why the distinction? Because the tablet represents absolute authority. Whoever holds it can decree fate not just for humans, but for gods, can reshape cosmic order, can command reality at its most fundamental level. The me represent particular powers within established order, metalworking, music, law, mathematics. These make civilization function, make humans capable and sophisticated, but they operate within the framework of reality. They don't change the framework itself. The tablet changes the framework. It's the control panel, the master key, the administrator access to the universe's operating system, and that is not, will never be, given to created beings. The pattern is clear. Humans receive enough knowledge and power to be useful, to serve effectively, to build impressive civilizations. But the core authorities, the tablet of destinies, the ability to decree ultimate fate, the power to restructure reality, those remain in divine hands. When humans approach that level, intervention occurs. We see this not just in failed attempts like Adappa's refused immortality, but in successful human achievements that provoke divine reaction. The antediluvian kings, for instance, living 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. That's not human, that's functionally godlike. And the text suggests these beings accumulated vast knowledge and wisdom across those impossible lifespans. Then the flood came, and the post-flood kings live 126 years, 140 years, 96 years, still long, still elevated, but dramatically reduced. Within a few generations, lifespans drop to recognizable human ranges. What happened? According to the Atrahasis epic, population control measures were imposed, but perhaps also longevity reduction. Perhaps the mixing of divine and human that produced the antediluvian rulers was corrected, diluted, brought down to safer levels, because humans who live 30,000 years accumulate too much knowledge, too much wisdom, too much understanding of divine secrets. They become too close to gods themselves. Better to have humans who live 70 years, 80 if they're lucky, long enough to learn, to contribute, to maintain civilization, not long enough to become truly ancient, truly wise, truly dangerous. The instructions of Shuruppak, wisdom from the last antediluvian king to the first post-flood survivor, preserve this transition. Shuruppak, son of Ubartutu, who ruled 18,600 years, gives advice to his son Ziusudra about living in the world that's coming after the flood. The advice is practical. Don't steal, don't commit adultery, listen to your elders, work hard, don't build your house next to a public square, don't buy a donkey that brays. It's wisdom for living a normal human life within normal human constraints. It's not wisdom for wielding cosmic power. It's not instruction in reshaping reality. It's advice for getting along, surviving, making a decent living in a world where you'll die in a few decades. The contrast is stark. Before the flood, rulers living tens of thousands of years. After the flood, practical advice about property purchases and workplace ethics. The reduction is deliberate. The texts describe it as divinely imposed. And the mechanism is the same we've seen throughout, limiting what humans can access, what they can know, what they can become. But humans, as the texts repeatedly show, don't accept limits easily. They push, they strive, they build. They build towers reaching toward heaven. And when they do, the gods respond with scattering. The tower and the scattering. The Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11 is famous. Humanity speaks one language, gathers in Shinar Shanii, decides to build a city with a tower reaching to heaven. God comes down and sees what they're doing. God confuses their language and scatters them across the earth. The story explains the origin of linguistic diversity and presents divine intervention against human ambition. What's less known is that this story has a Sumerian predecessor. The text Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta dates to around 2100 BC, making it over 1,000 years older than the probable composition date of the Genesis account. It's a lengthy narrative about Enmerkar, king of Uruk, and his rivalry with the Lord of Aratta, a distant mountain kingdom. Most of the text concerns trade negotiations, magical contests, and diplomatic exchanges, but embedded within it is a passage describing a lost golden age. Once upon a time there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror, man had no rival. In those days, the lands of Subur and Hamazi, the many-tongued, and Sumer, the great mountain of the Me of magnificence, and Akkad, the land possessing all that is befitting, and the Martu land, resting in security, the whole universe, the people in unison, to Enlil in one tongue, gave speech. The whole universe, one tongue, speaking to Enlil. The text continues, but it's fragmentary here. What follows appears to describe Enki confusing human language. Enki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who understands the land, the leader of the gods, endowed with wisdom, the Lord of Eridu, changed the speech in their mouths, brought contention into it, into the speech of man that until then had been one. Why did Enki do this? The text doesn't explicitly say, but the context suggests that unified humanity, speaking one language with one purpose, was somehow problematic. The Genesis account is more specific about divine motivation. When God comes down to see the tower, he says, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. Nothing will be impossible for them." That's the key phrase. United humanity, speaking one language, working toward common purpose, becomes capable of anything, and this capability is threatening enough that God the gods intervene to break it. The tower itself in the Genesis account, called Babel, connected to the Hebrew word for confusion, is traditionally identified with the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, particularly the great ziggurat of Babylon called Etemenanki, house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Etemenanki was real. Archaeological excavations have located its foundations. Historical records from multiple periods describe it. It was massive. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Babylon in the 5th century BC, described it as a tower with 7 levels reaching over 90 metres high. The base was approximately 91 metres square. The ziggurat was visible from miles away, dominating the Babylonian skyline. But Etemenanki wasn't the oldest ziggurat. Ziggurat construction began in the early dynastic period, around 2500 BC, possibly earlier. The White Temple at Uruk dates to approximately 3200 BC. These structures weren't arbitrary architectural choices. They were designed to connect earth and heaven, to create a literal stairway for gods to descend and humans to ascend for ritual purposes. The Sumerian word for ziggurat, unir, means mountain place or elevated place. The temples atop ziggurats were called houses of heaven and earth. They were built in imitation of sacred mountains, replicating on the flat Mesopotamian plain the elevated places where divine and human realms touched. Archaeologists have found foundation inscriptions describing ziggurat construction. King Ur-Nammu of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, Quillian Rund, built or rebuilt ziggurats at multiple cities. His inscriptions describe the work in terms of fulfilling divine command, for his king, Nanna, king of his city, or Nammu, mighty hero, king of Ur, king of Sumer and Akkad, has built his temple. But the ziggurats served dual purpose. Yes, they were houses for gods, but they were also demonstrations of human capability, engineering marvels, monuments to collective labour and architectural sophistication. They announced to anyone approaching the city, we can build mountains, we can create pathways to heaven. And if the Genesis account and the Amerka text preserve an actual memory, there was a time when that ambition triggered divine intervention. The mechanism of intervention, language confusion, is particularly interesting because language isn't just communication. Language is coordination. Unified language enables unified purpose. Complex projects require precise communication. Architecture requires shared vocabulary. Trade requires common understanding of terms. Break the language and you break the ability to coordinate at scale. People can still work within their linguistic groups, but large-scale unified projects become impossible. The tower remains unfinished, not because God strikes it with lightning, but because the workers can no longer understand each other's instructions. The result? Scattering. Genesis says, the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. The Enmerkar text says, Enki brought contention into human speech. Same result, unified humanity becomes divided humanity. This is, from a certain perspective, population control through another mechanism. The flood controlled population through destruction and new reproductive restrictions. Language confusion controls population distribution and limits cooperative capability. Because united humanity is dangerous. The phrase keeps appearing, nothing will be impossible for them. United humanity, working together, can achieve anything, including, perhaps, things the gods prefer humans not achieve. What kinds of things? The text suggests several. Reaching heaven, not just metaphorically, but literally. Building structures or developing capabilities that allow access to divine space. Acquiring forbidden knowledge, not just the practical me, but deeper secrets. Cosmological understanding, the knowledge of the gods that humans aren't supposed to possess. Achieving immortality, the combination of wisdom and eternal life that Adapa was denied. United humanity working toward life extension or transcendence of death. Rivaling divine power, becoming so capable, so sophisticated, so advanced, that the distinction between human and divine blurs. The Tower of Babel story, in both its Mesopotamian and biblical versions, suggests that this kind of unified human ambition is not acceptable to the divine realm. When humans unite for common purpose, when they leverage collective intelligence and coordinated action, they approach dangerous capability. And the intervention is surgical, not destruction, not elimination, just limitation. Introduce language barriers, create communication difficulties, force humanity to divide into groups that can't easily coordinate across linguistic boundaries. The project stops. The tower remains unfinished. Humanity spreads across the world, speaking different languages, developing different cultures, pursuing different purposes, divided, manageable, controlled. The archaeological record shows that early Mesopotamian culture was remarkably uniform across the southern alluvial plain during the Uruk period. Same pottery styles, same architectural techniques, same religious iconography from multiple cities, suggesting cultural unity, possibly linguistic unity. Then, around 3000 BC, we start seeing regional variation, different pottery traditions, different architectural styles, different religious emphases, cultural diversification. What caused this? Climate change, economic factors, political fragmentation, or is it possible the myths preserve memory of something deliberate, something imposed? We can't know. The historical evidence is ambiguous. Multiple factors likely contributed to cultural diversification, but the myths themselves, from Sumer and from the Hebrew tradition that drew on Mesopotamian sources, present it as deliberate divine intervention in response to unified human ambition. And the pattern fits the broader pattern we've been tracing. Humans created for servitude, humans developing beyond servitude, divine intervention to reimpose limits. The flood limited population. The language confusion limited coordination. The denial of immortality limited lifespan. The guarding of the Tablet of Destinies limited access to ultimate authority. Mechanism after mechanism, all serving the same purpose, keeping humans within boundaries, capable enough to be useful, never capable enough to be equal. The Sumerians themselves seemed aware of this. Their texts don't present it as injustice, that's a modern reading. They present it as cosmic order. This is how things are. Humans serve gods. Gods maintain control. The hierarchy is fundamental to the structure of reality. But embedded in the text is also pride. Look what we built. Look at our cities, our ziggurats, our arts and sciences, our writing, our mathematics, our literature. We did this despite limitations. We achieved sophistication within constraints. And perhaps, buried deeper in the text, there's question, why the constraints? If we're made from divine blood, if we carry that spark of intelligence, if we're capable of such achievement, why must we die? Why must we scatter? Why must the ultimate knowledge remain forever out of reach? The texts don't answer. They just preserve the pattern. And the pattern is consistent enough across enough independent sources from enough different periods that it can't be dismissed as coincidence or misreading. This is what the Sumerians said. This is what they believed. This is what they recorded in the most permanent medium available to them, preserved in tens of thousands of tablets, now sitting in museum collections across the world, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood, waiting for someone to ask, what were they actually saying? Not what we think ancient people should have believed, not what fits our comfortable religious frameworks, not what makes sense to modern sensibilities, what they actually said. Reading the pattern. We've examined 7 major categories of Sumerian and Akkadian sources: the king list with its antediluvian rulers, the creation accounts describing humanity fashioned for labour, the Atrahasis epic detailing the noise complaint and flood, the Inanna myth showing the me being transferred to human space, the Adapa legend granting wisdom but denying immortality, the Anzu myth protecting the tablet of destinies from unauthorized access, and the Enmerka text preserving memory of linguistic unity and confusion. These texts come from different periods spanning over 1,000 years. They were found at different archaeological sites across Mesopotamia. They were written by different scribes, copied by different schools, preserved in different collections. They have no single author, no unified composition date, no coordinated agenda, yet they present a coherent pattern. That pattern can be summarized. Humanity was created by higher intelligences for a specific purpose, labor and service, but humanity developed capabilities beyond that purpose, triggering repeated divine interventions designed to limit human knowledge, power, population, coordination and lifespan, while maintaining enough human capability to continue serving divine needs. This pattern isn't hidden. It's not something you have to squint to see. It's explicit in the texts themselves. The only reason it seems surprising or controversial is because we've been trained to read ancient mythology through particular lenses, either dismissing it as primitive superstition or filtering it through later religious frameworks that emphasize divine love and human dignity. But the Mesopotamian texts don't emphasize divine love. They emphasize divine need. The gods need servants. They created servants. Those servants turned out to be more capable and problematic than anticipated. Adjustments were made. Now, what does this mean? How should we interpret it? There are 3 major frameworks. Framework 1, literal mythology. The texts describe gods in the theological sense, divine beings, immortal and powerful, existing in a supernatural realm. They created humans through supernatural means. The events described, creation from clay and blood, the flood, language confusion, are mythological explanations for human origins and cultural diversity. They reflect ancient peoples' attempts to understand their place in the cosmos through religious storytelling. This framework treats the texts as religious literature, valuable for understanding ancient belief, but not as historical or factual accounts. The pattern of divine control over humanity reflects the political realities of ancient Mesopotamia, where kings ruled absolutely and subjects existed to serve. The myths project that hierarchical social structure onto the cosmic level. This is mainstream scholarly interpretation. It takes the texts seriously as cultural artifacts and religious expressions, but doesn't treat them as describing actual events. Framework 2. Encoded wisdom. The texts preserve ancient philosophical and spiritual understanding encoded in mythological narrative. The gods represent aspects of consciousness, cosmic principles, or natural forces. The creation of humanity describes the emergence of self-aware consciousness in the universe. The divine interventions represent critical transitions in human development. The flood as a reference to actual catastrophic climate events, language diversity as the natural result of population dispersion, mortality as the inevitable biological limitation of physical existence. The pattern of humans reaching for divine status represents the universal human struggle against limitation, our desire to transcend death, to unify knowledge, to achieve ultimate understanding. The gods preventing this represent natural constraints, the boundaries of what's possible within physical reality. This framework treats the texts as wisdom literature, using mythological language to communicate deep truths about human nature, consciousness, and cosmic order. The pattern isn't about actual interventions by external beings, but about the recurring human experience of aspiration, limitation, and accommodation with reality. This is a common approach in depth psychology, comparative mythology, and esoteric traditions that see ancient myths as repositories of perennial wisdom. Framework 3. Historical documentation. The texts preserve actual memories of events involving non-human intelligences that created or modified humanity. Whether those intelligences were extraterrestrial visitors, time-travelling future humans, advanced prehistoric civilizations, interdimensional entities, or something else entirely, they possessed capabilities the Sumerians interpreted as divine. The pattern describes real policies implemented by these beings to manage humanity, genetic modifications limiting lifespan, interventions controlling population, the introduction of linguistic diversity, restrictions on certain technologies or knowledge. The consistency of the pattern across multiple independent sources suggests these weren't just stories but preserved memories passed down through all tradition before being written. The texts are historical documents from the Sumerian perspective, recording events as they understood them. This framework takes the texts as descriptive rather than merely symbolic. The gods were real entities, not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense of actual intelligences that interacted with early humanity and shaped human development according to their own purposes. This is the interpretation favoured by alternative history researchers, ancient astronaut theorists, and those investigating the possibility of non-human intelligence in human history. Each framework has strengths and problems. Framework 1, Truthology, explains why these stories appear across multiple cultures in similar forms, their universal mythological themes. But it doesn't explain why the Sumerian versions are so procedurally specific. The creation accounts describe mixing ratios, purification timing, specific ritual procedures. The flood narratives give detailed boat building instructions. These don't read like pure mythology, they read like remembered procedures. Framework 2 explains the psychological and philosophical power of these stories. They resonate because they describe universal human experiences, but it requires heavy interpretation, reading meanings into the text that aren't necessarily there. When Enki says, "I will mix clay with blood to create workers," that's a straightforward statement, not obviously a metaphor for consciousness emergence. Framework 3, Historical Document, takes the texts at face value, but it requires accepting that non-human intelligences intervened in human history, which conflicts with mainstream scientific understanding. It also raises questions. If these interventions actually occurred, where's the physical evidence? Where are the genetic markers of artificial modification? Where are the archaeological traces of advanced technology? None of the frameworks is completely satisfying. Each explains some things well and struggles with others. What we can say with certainty, the texts exist. They're real documents from a real ancient civilization. The texts present a consistent pattern across multiple independent sources. That pattern describes humanity as created beings, given intelligence for functional purposes, limited when that intelligence threatened to make humans equal to their creators. The Sumerians themselves took these texts seriously. They weren't writing fiction or allegory in the modern sense. They were preserving what they believed to be true accounts of their origins and history. Whether those accounts describe actual events, encode philosophical wisdom, or represent sincere but mistaken religious belief, the texts preserve a perspective radically different from modern assumptions about human exceptionalism and autonomy. We like to think of humanity as the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of Earth, beings of inherent dignity and unlimited potential. We celebrate human achievement and imagine endless progress toward greater knowledge, longer life, higher capability. The Mesopotamian texts offer a different picture. Humanity as created entities, fashioned for a purpose, limited when we exceed that purpose, managed by intelligences that consider us useful but not equal. That picture is uncomfortable. It challenges our self-conception. It suggests we might not be as autonomous as we think, that there might be boundaries we're not supposed to cross, that the obstacles to human transcendence, death, linguistic diversity, controlled knowledge, scattered coordination, might not be accidents of nature, but imposed limitations. It raises questions we prefer not to ask. What if human intelligence was always meant to serve rather than to reign? What if the knowledge we call progress is actually the slow recovery of capabilities that were taken from us? What if the reason we can't achieve certain breakthroughs, life extension, unified understanding, ultimate coordination, isn't because they're impossible, but because we're being prevented? These are deeply unsettling questions. They conflict with Enlightenment assumptions about human autonomy and potential. They sound paranoid, conspiratorial, disempowering. But they're the questions the Sumerian texts themselves pose. Not in the language of conspiracy theory, the Sumerians didn't think in those terms. In the language of cosmic order. This is how things are structured. This is the hierarchy of being. Humans serve, gods rule, the boundaries maintained. And when humans forget the boundary, when they reach too high, when they become too numerous or too unified or too knowledgeable, intervention occurs. Not because the gods are cruel, because the gods need servants who remain servants. That's the pattern. That's what the texts say. That's what tens of thousands of clay tablets preserve in climate-controlled museum vaults, waiting for anyone willing to read them without preconception, without filtering, without deciding in advance what they must mean. Just reading what they say. And what they say is that human intelligence, the quality that makes us human, that we celebrate as our highest achievement, that distinguishes us from animals, was from the very beginning regarded by those who created us as something to be carefully controlled. Because intelligence in servants is useful, intelligence in equals is threatening, and the gods, according to the Sumerians, will not tolerate equals, what the clay remembers. In the vault beneath the Penn Museum, CBS 10673 sits in its archival housing, temperature controlled, protected from light, preserved against deterioration. The cuneiform impressions on its surface are as sharp today as when the scribe pressed them 3,600 years ago. The clay remembers. That's the thing about clay tablets. Papyrus rots, parchment decays, paper yellows and crumbles, but fire-hardened clay lasts essentially forever if you protect it from being smashed. The Sumerians chose the most permanent medium available. Whether they knew their civilization would end, whether they anticipated that someday no one would speak their language or remember their gods, we can't know. But they wrote on clay, and clay persists. So their words persist, their accounts, their perspective on who they were, where they came from, what their relationship was with those they called the Anunnaki. We've looked at those accounts tonight. The creation narratives, the flood stories, the wisdom denied, the me transferred, the tower abandoned, the pattern of human capability emerging and divine limitation being imposed. None of this is secret. None of it is hidden. The texts sit in libraries and museums. Translations are available. The electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature lets anyone with internet access read these sources. But we don't tend to read them. Or when we do, we read them through filters, dismissing them as primitive mythology or interpreting them through later religious frameworks that domesticate their strangeness, or cherry-picking elements that support particular theories while ignoring contradicting evidence. What I've tried to do tonight is just present what the texts actually say, show you the pattern as it appears across multiple independent sources. Let the Sumerians speak for themselves. And they speak of limitation, of capability granted for specific purposes, of intelligence that's useful but dangerous, of interventions when humans exceed boundaries, of knowledge controlled and immortality denied, and ultimate authority kept forever in divine hands. Whether that describes actual events, whether it encodes ancient wisdom, whether it reflects sincere but mistaken religious belief, that's for you to decide. Because this investigation can't provide certainty. The evidence is ancient. The texts are fragmentary. Multiple interpretations are possible. Scholars will continue debating meanings and contexts and historical backgrounds. But the pattern is there, undeniable, consistent, preserved in the most durable library humanity ever created. And that pattern raises a question we each have to answer for ourselves. When we push against limits, when we seek to extend life, to unify knowledge, to coordinate globally, to achieve capabilities our ancestors couldn't imagine, are we fulfilling human potential? Or are we approaching boundaries someone once decided we shouldn't cross? The Sumerian texts suggest the latter. They suggest that human intelligence, human coordination, human achievement at scale has historically triggered intervention, that there are thresholds beyond which we're not supposed to go. Maybe that's just ancient superstition. Maybe those thresholds don't exist anymore, if they ever did. Maybe we're truly autonomous now, free to develop however we choose, no longer managed by anyone or anything. Or maybe the pattern holds. Maybe the boundaries still exist. Maybe the interventions still occur, just in forms we don't recognise as interventions. We can't know from the texts alone. They tell us what the Sumerians believed, what they remembered, what they recorded. They don't tell us whether those beliefs corresponded to reality. What they do tell us is that for thousands of years, in one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated civilizations, the dominant understanding was that humans were created entities, fashioned for a purpose, limited when we exceeded that purpose. And they wanted us to know that. They wrote it down. They taught it in their schools. They copied the texts across generations. They preserved the knowledge in fire-hardened clay, almost as if they wanted future generations to understand where we came from, what we were made for. What happens when we reach too high? The clay remembers. Perhaps we should remember too. Outside the museum, the city of Philadelphia sleeps or wakes, depending on the hour. Lives continue. People go about their business, pursuing their purposes, generally not thinking about Sumerian creation myths or divine limitations or the question of who made us and why. But in the vault, the tablet sits, and in vaults and collections across the world, tens of thousands more tablets sit, waiting, preserved, holding their stories, holding the possibility that we're not what we think we are, that our intelligence, our greatest treasure, might also be our most carefully managed limitation, that we're servants who learn to think, workers who developed wisdom, created beings who wonder about our creators, and that those creators, whether gods, whether visitors, whether something else entirely, regard our wondering with the same discomfort Enlil felt at humanity's noise. Because intelligent servants are useful, but servants who question their purpose, who seek knowledge beyond their assigned tasks, who work together toward goals their creators didn't approve, those are dangerous. The texts say so, explicitly, repeatedly, consistently. You've heard them tonight. You've seen the pattern. You've followed the evidence from Nippur to Uruk, from Eridu to Shurupak, from creation to flood, to scattered languages and controlled knowledge. Now you decide what it means, whether it describes our actual past, whether it illuminates our present, whether it warns about our future. The clay remembers. The question is, do we? Thank you for listening. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, I hope these ancient voices have given you something to think about as you drift towards sleep. Perhaps you'll dream of clay tablets, of cuneiform script, of words pressed into earth 5,000 years ago to preserve memories of the time before cities, before writing, before the flood, before the gods decided humanity needed limits. Sweet dreams. And if this resonated with you, if these ancient questions feel somehow relevant to your own wondering about human origins and purpose, let me know in the comments. Share where you're listening from. Share what these stories make you think about. The conversation continues. The clay remembers. And we, their descendants, keep asking the questions they preserved for us. Where did we come from? Who made us? What were we made for? And why, when we reach for knowledge and unity and transcendence, do we so often find ourselves scattered, confused, limited, and reminded of our mortality? Perhaps the tablets know. Perhaps the answer is pressed into clay, waiting in museum vaults, patient as only Earth can be patient. Good night.